All right, let's get started. All right, so now we are going to start talking about the details of the language itself. Okay, the JavaScript language. We've seen the different environments in which we can execute JavaScript code. Now let's learn about the details of the language itself. Now, any programming language, and any computer program consists of two main components. Okay, if you remove all the accessories, it all boils down to exactly two things: some data and some processing that happens on this data. Okay, no matter how complicated it is, even if it's an AI algorithm, it doesn't matter what it is. If you boil it down to the most basic components, it's exactly two things: data and some processing happening on this data. All right, so the first thing you need to know when you learn a new language is what are the data ranges, how the data is represented in this language, okay, and what kind of operations we can apply on this data. Okay, now when we are talking about JavaScript, there are only three basic data types. Okay, now we can construct more complicated or complex data types based on these. We will see that later. But the most basic data types in the language itself are three: number, string, and boolean. That's it. Okay. So when we talk about numbers, well, first of all, the data type determines the range of values, the representation, and the type of operations that can apply on them. Okay, so when we say we have three data types, I mean three ranges or three data representations, each of them with specific operations that can apply on them. Okay, now when we are talking about JavaScript, we have three. First one is number, and that's the one of the this is the first distinction between Java and JavaScript. If you remember, in Java, how many types do we have to represent numbers?
All numbers or just integers?
Well, integers is one type.
Yeah. Integers is one.
Float, double and float and long, and there are others as well. Yeah. So there are basically there are main distinction between discrete numbers and fractional numbers, right? So discrete numbers like integers and long, fractional numbers like float and double. Okay. Now in JavaScript, there is no that distinction doesn't exist. We only have a number, and this number data type represents any numeric value. Either it is discrete, like what is in Java integer, okay, or fractional, so there's a decimal point, or scientific. So we see this here. That means that this number multiplied by 10 to the power of e. Okay. So either these numbers, either these values are considered under the data type number in JavaScript. Okay, and something to remember: this e doesn't have to be small. Now we know that JavaScript is case sensitive, right? So the capital is not the same as small in general when we talk about identifiers and keywords. But this is neither identifier nor a keyword. This is considered part of the numeric representation. So it doesn't matter if it's E small or capital. It just represents this scientific notation. It's the same as saying multiply this by 10 to the power of 8. Okay? Okay, so this is the range of data that are represented by this data type. Now, what operations can we do on this data type? First is an arithmetic operation. So when we say operations, we talk about operator and operand, right? So an operator and operands are the values that the operators apply to, and all of them, the operators and the operator and the operands, are considered operations. Okay, Now, when the operands are numeric, the operators could be arithmetic operators. There's another type of operators that can apply numeric values, but for now, the main one is the arithmetic operator. So the basic arithmetic operations like division, multiplication, negation, and subtraction. Now the negation is not the same as subtraction when you talk about programming. So it's the same operator, so the same character, the minus sign. If it's treated as a unary operator, so unary operator means it takes one operand. Then it is called a negation operator. So it just, you say -5, so that value of -5 is equal to +5, right? So let's I'm just gonna open Node.js here. So we've seen one way to open Node.js. If you open a terminal and then type the command node, it will open Node.js in the terminal, right? There's another way that it has its own, like there's another tool that opens that Node.js terminal right away. Okay, so I'm just gonna increase the font here. Okay, so we're talking about the operator, negative, so the minus sign. When we treat it as a unary operator, so we give it one operand, it is negation. So -5, you see, it's a negation of the number 5. Minus, applying on -5, that's the negation of the minus, so it goes back to positive. Okay? Now, when that operator is treated as a binary operator, which means that it takes 2 operands, it would be subtraction. Okay? And you probably already are familiar with the operator precedence, right? So when we say 100 plus 4 inside the parentheses multiplied by 11, it's not the same as saying this, right? So it's generally speaking, the operations or the operators are applied left to right, except when they are different in the precedence. Okay, so the multiplication and division and remainder go before the subtraction and the addition. Okay, so in order to avoid the confusion that happens because of this operator precedence, we use the parentheses. So if we want the addition to happen first, we have to put it inside parentheses. Okay, so this is the precedence in JavaScript. I think most of the languages have this precedence. The negation comes first, and then the multiplication, division, and the remainder, and the subtraction and the addition comes last. And you're familiar with the remainder operator, right? That gives you the remainder of the division. Okay, so all right. So we call it modulo sometimes. All right. So you already are probably familiar with that. So okay, move on. Now there are some special values under the same type. Now we've seen these values are very similar here. The normal values, the normal numeric values that we are used to, right? But there are special values still under the type of a number in JavaScript. Okay, so these special values are infinity, okay, and minus infinity. So if you divide anything by 0, the result is infinity. And the value is represented with the characters, but it is not string. It is still a numeric value. Okay, so if we go back to our Node.js here, so if I say 5 divided by 0, you see it's infinity, but it's not a string. Okay, if I say infinity minus infinity, it's not a number. Okay, so we presented it like the value itself is represented by characters, but it is numeric value. We will see that there is an operator called type of that give us the type of that value. So if I say type of infinity, it's a number. All right. So that's a special value in JavaScript. And related to it is the negative infinity. So when you say 0 minus infinity is negative infinity. Okay. And it might sound funny, but not that or not a number is a value of the number type. Okay, so let's see that. If I say type of nan, so in terms of the type, the data type associated to it, it's a number. Okay, but it is a result of illegal operation. Okay, so infinity minus infinity is that's an illegal operation, so the result is not a number. All right. Now this value is kind of dangerous. It can cause a lot of confusion because it's not in error. If you try to divide by 0 in Java, for example, it will give you an error, right? It will give you an exception, and it will stop the execution. Now in JavaScript, if you try to divide by 0, it's not going to give you an error. Or if you do an illegal arithmetic operation, it's not going to give you an error. It will silently give it one of these special values, and then special value will keep propagating. So let's say you have an operation that ended up with a nan as a result, and then this nan has entered into another operation. So the result of that will be nan as well. And it will keep propagating silently like that. Okay, it's not going to give you an error. So we have to be careful about it.